long and bore everybody. It'll be okay. All right. Great. Well, hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for joining this morning. What I want to talk to you about is the right product backlog and getting to the right set of user stories. There's really two reasons that I wanted to talk about that. The first is, well, I'm just sort of like a product guy, and so I naturally sort of think about the product backlog, and I think about how do we know that we're working on the right stuff. My background, as Sanjeev had just said, was I was a former VP of Product and UX at OPower. Took that from a sort of like upstart company to a now public organization, and that was about a year ago. And then I left that to kind of get into the startup advisory world. And so what I love about that is for every year that I work, I probably work with about 12 companies or so, and so I kind of feel like I'm packing about 12 years of experience in every one. So it's a lot of fun, and then what I also wanted to share was my contact information. So this is my LinkedIn profile. If you want to go connect with me on that, just let me know that you were here at the presentation. If there's anything that I talk about that you'd like to follow up on, my email address is up there. It's just benfoster129@gmail. I also just launched like a day or two ago my website, so you can go to Foster Innovation. It has a dash because some squatter took my domain. And then if you must tweet, Foster Innovates is my handle. I'm not so much of a Twitter guy. Feel free to follow me. You'll see probably last time I did anything. Anyway, so that's kind of like reason number one that I wanted to talk to you about this. And reason number two that I wanted to talk to you about the subject of what goes into the product backlog is because of this. It doesn't matter how good you are at building the wrong thing. And I think that when we look at Agile and we sort of like look at Scrum and Kanban and all these different kinds of approaches, in a lot of ways they're really methodologies for delivering things. But I've kind of noticed that time and time again, there's really just not a lot of discussion going on into what went into the product backlog in the first place. There's a lot of talk about what goes in, how do you take a product backlog and turn it into a sprint backlog, and what do you do in terms of like cycles, and having potentially shippable releases, and all this kind of fun stuff, but there's really not much on the left side of the chart. When I usually do keynote speeches and things like that, the people who put on the conference say, hey, talk about really big, bold things and kind of wave your hands a lot. And one of the things that I actually like about these guys is they have a very different kind of approach. They're like, actually, that's not what we want. What we want is for you guys to have something practical, something you can kind of take back to the office tomorrow and put back in place right away. And so I said, okay, that's great. I love that. That's much more me anyway. And so what I thought I would do is just kind of tell you what some of those takeaways are that I'm hoping that you can get. And if you don't get the answer to these kinds of questions, then please find me during a lunch break or something like that, and I'll be happy to try to answer your questions. If we don't connect then, please do use my email and follow up. Here's what I'm looking for you to try to get out of this, which is I would love for you to have a good method for identifying stakeholders. I would love for you to have a clear, metrics-driven process for figuring out what goes into the product backlog. I would love for you to have tools to provide transparency within your organization, to try to get alignment around where it is that you're actually going with the products and things like that you're building. I would also like for you to have a strategy for focused innovation. And I've seen this kind of thing happen a lot, where it's sort of, with Agile, you kind of get things into such small sizes of user stories that it's very easy to kind of think, well, this is the next incremental improvement that I can make. Here's the next incremental improvement that I can make. And at the end of the year, you kind of look back and say, but what did we actually do? Like, did we really build anything new? Were we really directed in any one particular place? And so I want to kind of share with you a practice for doing that as well. And along the way, I'll try to provide to you real-world examples of where I've tried to put these things in place at OPower, how they've worked, situations where I put these principles in place at startups that I've been advising, and how that's gone. And then I also want to make sure that I have time to answer your questions. Okay. All right. So before we jump in, take a look at this for a second. It took me a little bit of time to figure this out. And if you don't have it yet, the guy's on the moon, and then the background is also the moon. And if you look at a picture for kind of long enough, you kind of start to see these things. But what I wanted to do was start with this, because I have a similar question about this picture. What's wrong with this one? Looks like a standard Scrum process. You start with your product backlog, you turn it into your sprint planning meeting, sprint backlog. There's all these cycles, everybody's happy and they're multicolored. That's great. And if you look in about the same place of this picture as the last one, that's where the issue lies to me, which is you get inputs from executive teams, stakeholders, customers, users, and it goes to a product owner, and then there's just this blank space, and then a product backlog arrives. And I was like, that's not fair. Come on, as a product guy, like, tell me a little bit about how you're supposed to go make that happen, right? It's not like you just kind of throw everything into a backlog and then it just kind of like works out to be prioritized. It would be nice if that was the case. So I kind of like this. I even kept these guys like banging here because they said Agile for all, and I thought it was like, yeah, Agile for all except the product owner. That's great. So to me, that's sort of like the problem is where did this kind of thing come from? So I had this question of, okay, well, maybe that's just like this diagram. Let me go cruise around the internet, and I'll go to Google image search, and I'll just go to try to find, other Scrum, processes and see what they have to say about it. Well, let me check that. Let's see. There's that one. Okay, and then I found another one that looks like this. I love that one. Just sort of starts the product backlog. That one's good. And then the left side of this diagram looked like that. Backlog just turns into a sprint backlog, and there's not even a person who's working on it. My favorite one, though, was this one over here. This diagram is huge. Okay, it goes through that wall over there on the other side about all these details about what the sort of like Scrum and Agile process looks for this company that was sort of like putting this together. And my favorite part is like they just have no detail compared to anything else about the generation of the product backlog. In fact, there's this like machine that these guys are like karate chopping or something, and then out towards user stories which just kind of fall into a product backlog. I love it. So I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. So to me, there's two reasons that I can kind of think of that these diagrams don't really have a lot of detail on the generation of the product backlog. And I think the first of those is, to their credit, it's really hard to pull one together, especially if you kind of look at it as like the sort of principled, correct, theoretically perfect product backlog, which is what? It's, each user story is independent. They're all rank ordered from 1 all the way down to 1,000. And you can put every single, try to organize things in your life, 1 to 1,000. Put every single thing in a perfect kind of like order, and just say, hey, you're gonna draw the couple. It doesn't really work that way a lot of the time. And every individual user story has its own discrete, independent business value. I think the reality is it's just not the way a lot of products end up working, and it's really hard to kind of put things into this format. So it's really hard to describe what the process is for getting there, when it turns out it's sort of an impossible task. And to give you an example of this, here's a car, right? A car is a product. We all kind of familiar with that. So questions, which is more important, being able to brake or being able to accelerate? Brake. Yes, you're right, actually. Because if you can accelerate without braking, then you've got a negative business value, I would say. But braking without accelerating is a 0 business value. So they're both really valuable, and yet they both kind of show up as either being 0 or negative, right? The second thing is, isn't there some sort of dependency, a technical dependency between an engine and a tailpipe? Yeah, I'd say yes. I don't really want the engine without the tailpipe, because otherwise there's going to be a big fiery accident. That's not going to be so good. And then what's the business value of an axle, right? Like, I don't know. We need to put it in the car. It needs to exist, but I don't know what the business value of that is. What's the business value of any one of 350 parts of a car? I don't know. And at the end of the day, this notion you can sort of just take all the different parts of a car, which is really your answer as to how do you get from point A to point B, rank order them in the order that makes the most sense, and then draw a cut line somewhere around there. And if you get 99% of the way there, that might be good enough. Well, the reality is, you have to have a potentially shippable product. But it's a whole lot of user stories until you get to a potentially shippable product, which a lot of times kind of is anti-lean, right? Because then you're saying, I've got to do 350 things before I can even launch the first version of it. That takes years and years to get to. So there's a little bit of a conflict there, right? And if the reality is I can only get 99% of a working car, well, hey, that 1% still really matters to me, and I don't want to die in a fiery, explosion. So I would much rather have a bicycle than to have 99% of a car, right? And so the reality is you might say, hey, the cut line would be drawn here, but if that's where the cut line is going to be drawn, then hey, scrap the whole entire thing. I don't want any of those user stories. What I actually want is this completely different set of user stories over here. And that kind of thing can happen as well, right? So the notion that it's kind of like easy to come up with the right product backlog is, it's fairly complicated to do. And I think that's why a lot of these diagrams just don't really have much detail. There's a second reason that there's not too much in these diagrams as well. As a product person myself, I guess I'm allowed to say this, but that's because 96% of product owners suck. I mean, come on, like we've all worked with bad product owners, product managers. We've all kind of been there. Even as a product manager, I've worked with a lot of ones that haven't been so good. And it is really difficult to do. And I think it's because they can kind of fall on one end of the spectrum or the other very easily. If you guys have ever watched the movie Office Space, ever watched the movie Office Space? You're in the scene where these consultants come in and they're kind of like basically interviewing everybody who's already working there to kind of like see whether they should continue to work there. And these guys these consultants, they're talking to this guy and they're like, so what would you say you do here? And his answer is like, well, he never says I'm a product owner, but you can kind of figure it out, right? He's like, well, I take the specifications from the customer and I give them to the engineer. And there are questions like, well, why can't the engineers just go straight to the customers and get them? And that's actually a very legitimate point. If there's no interpretation of that, if they're not kind of understanding what the customer's problem is and kind of figuring out what the right solution is to that problem, then they're not really adding a whole lot of value. And so I think a lot of product managers stink because they fall on that side of the spectrum. But then some product managers are like, aha, I'm smart, I'm aware that I shouldn't be doing that, I'm going to come up with this ingenious plan. I'm going to do a lot of hand waving, kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right? And so, we're off to see the wizard, we're going to go talk to the product owner, and we're going to understand exactly why we're working on what we're working on. And it sounds like this big booming voice, I have a master plan for exactly what we're going to do with our product, and whatever. But if you actually pull the curtain back, you kind of realize there's not really much behind why the product is actually saying what they're saying and what they should do. Why are we working on this again? Why is that exactly the right strategy? What about this other stuff that the stakeholder is saying is really important for the product, but I'm not really seeing the product backlog? What's going on here? And if you just kind of pull the curtain back a lot of times, you realize there's not really much behind it. Bridging the gap between these two extremes is exactly what I want to talk about. Okay? So what I wanted to start with was just sort of like a quick assessment. If you're honest with yourselves, does this kind of thing ever happen? Whether you're a product owner or an engineer or a stakeholder or no matter what role you play in the organization, you still have a perspective about how this kind of product roadmap rollout happens or how the kind of definition of the product backlog goes. And to me, it's kind of like, this is the litmus test. If you ever have these situations where you publish the roadmap and you're the product owner, you're really excited, and you unveil it to all, and everybody says, where's my pet feature? What's that thing over there? I don't really get what this is. That's usually a sign that there's something wrong, right? If you work hard improving the product for a year, and I've actually done this a couple of times earlier in my career, and then the CEO at the end of the year says, but it doesn't seem like we've built anything. That's really inspiring. I love that. Or you sort of build a bunch of new and exciting features, and you've heard from customers that this is the kind of thing that they really want, and then sales says, yeah, I don't really think I can sell that. Or you get, you do everything that your customers ask for, and at the same time they still end up flocking to a competitor. This is like innovator's dilemma over and over again. Kind of what's happening here. You kind of do exactly the kinds of things they're looking for, but what you didn't do was sort of reinvent, the kind of solution. Somebody else leapfrogs you, and all your customers move to them, despite the fact that you spent your whole entire time listening to exactly what they said that they wanted, right? So that kind of thing can happen. Or you walk stakeholders through the plan regularly, and you feel like everybody's on board, and you unveil a roadmap, and then you actually hear the water cooler talking, and people are like, yeah, I don't really understand what's on there. I don't really know why we're doing that. I don't agree. I get a different perspective than somebody else, and nobody's really aligned around this thing. These are all kind of signs that there's something wrong, and so these are the kinds of things that I want to try to address with this specific strategy. So a lot of companies that I work with, startups and things like that, they kind of come to me saying, hey, I'm a CEO who's been, sort of playing the product role for a while here. We're now getting to the point where we've been successful enough that this company is scaling, and I need to kind of step out of that position and really just be the CEO, which means there's now this sort of gaping hole in the organization for product management. I want to hire the right kinds of people to do that, but I don't know what the right process is that we're supposed to follow. I don't really know what the right way is that we're supposed to kind of develop our roadmap and our backlog. So this kind of question comes up to me a lot, so what I'm trying to do is establish a little framework for thinking through this, and this is what it looks like. So basically 7 steps to this process. The first one is identifying the stakeholders. Okay? You can't really do a good job of coming up with the right product backlog if you haven't had full consideration of all the stakeholders, all the people who actually care and have a dependency on the product as you're building it. There are often a number of stakeholders who get forgotten. Everybody realizes that sales is a stakeholder. Everybody realizes that marketing is a stakeholder. Customer service is a stakeholder. But a lot of times what they don't realize is that engineering isn't just the group that builds the product, but they also have expectations from the head of the company about things that they're going to do, which is quality, right? Which is speed of development. And there are certain kinds of product enhancements that they can have made to the product that they'd like to have prioritized in order to fulfill their obligation back to the business. That's true for engineering. It's also true for product management itself. It kind of like folds back in on itself. And as a product manager, I might say, hey, look, I want to be able to go into this, into this other market, or I want to broaden what our market reach is with this particular product. But as it stands right now, I don't have any sort of defensible mechanisms for doing that. So maybe we need to go capture data in a way and then house data inside of our application that's going to be a strategic asset that we'll then be able to use to go take away market share from somebody else, right? So the question becomes, what am I doing in the product today to put me in a position so that tomorrow I'll have that kind of an opportunity, right? So the product manager is also a stakeholder of the product. So are users. Oftentimes users kind of like get forgotten despite the fact that there's so much focus on sort of like users on this. It might be that internal stakeholders kind of represent the users, but talking to users directly is something that you can never really replicate. So that's important, just kind of get the right set of stakeholders. The next thing I would say is cluster them into a few different groups. Okay, just to have 14 different kinds of stakeholders, each with 14 different kinds of opinions, it honestly just gets like a little bit unwieldy. And so I think you can kind of combine things, like maybe sales and marketing gets clumped together, maybe engineering and operations can get clumped together. You can do it a few different ways, and it probably depends on your organization. And then with those clusters that you create, have them really kind of put their own heads together and speak as one. I don't want 50 opinions from 50 salespeople. I want one opinion from the combination of sales and marketing. That's actually helpful to me as a product. And the kinds of things that I want their opinions on, I'll cover in a second. Here's an example from a company that I advise called WeSpire. They did this organization, and this is the way that they kind of like broke things down. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different groups within their company, and they decided to cluster them in the following ways. Okay? You could probably do something similar, but you might cluster it in a slightly different way. That's totally fine. Part 2, once you have these stakeholder groups, the stakeholders need to come up with some sort of a scorecard for the product. Now I'm just going to take a pause on this process for a second and kind of tell you about where this came from, which is my daughter's in 7th grade. She comes home with a report card, and she's got some A's, and she's got some B's, and she's got some C's, and things like that. It was interesting. As a parent, I wanted to think, you should have A's across the board. But the reality is she's taking one class that's guitar, and she's not particularly musically gifted. I'm actually really excited that she's willing to take this class. And if she's getting a B in the class, to me that's kind of like, that's fun. I don't need it to be, A+ perfection across the board. The point was for you to have fun with it, and you're having fun with it. That's great. I want you to do that. I don't need it to be more than that, right? And so there was nothing that, that me, even being one of those Arlington parents, needed to say to my daughter about this, right? And so what I kind of realized is that there's almost like there's the grades that a person gets, and then there's the grades that are actually satisfactory for you to feel like you're doing a good enough job. And I think one of the things that's really important in a company is that you identify those things that are good enough and those things that really need to be superior. And that's an important kind of part of this process as well. So the stakeholders, just like the teachers for my daughter, should be the ones defining the attributes on which she's going to be judged. Like my daughter doesn't get to say, you're going to judge me on reading and writing and art and all the things I like. She's also going to get judged on math because that's also a thing that she needs to be good at, right? And so whether she likes that or not, that's going to be something that's important. But it's the teachers and it's the school who's going to be having that opinion. In a similar fashion here, it's the stakeholders who are going to have those kinds of opinions. And that's why it's important to cluster them into a few different groups, because you don't want to have different scorecards, you want to have like 5. Okay? But if you've got these scorecards, then you can start those groups. They have KPIs, they have goals that they're supposed to hit. And if they start by just writing down, here are the expectations that the business has of me. And I'll just kind of like choose sales because it's easy to talk about. I've got a quota. We have a certain amount of revenue that we're supposed to get to next year. And I can document what that is. The next thing I can say is, when it comes to dependencies on the product, I can maybe hit that number as is without any enhancements from the product at all. If that's the case, great, we're done. But if there is actually a dependency on the product, where in order to hit that number, you're going to have some product enhancements take place, I want to know what those are, okay? And it's not that I want to know the specific features, it's that I want to know the attributes that are actually important, okay? So if user experience is one of your stakeholders, ease of use of the application would be the attribute, not this particular feature to rework the tab structure in our web app. That's a different kind of like story. That's a specific feature, and we'll come to that in a second. But the important thing here is prioritizing the problem space, prioritizing the parts that matter in the first place, And then we'll figure out how to go solve those things. And the best people to have the perspective about what the product needs to be able to do well are the stakeholders who have goals for the company that are dependent on the product development team to help them to reach those goals. Third part here is determining what makes a passing grade, right? It doesn't need to be an A+ at every level. What does it really need to be, right? So if you're doing, let's say, a consumer application, security is important. Nobody wants their data to just be sort of distributed across the internet. But at the same time, the reason that consumers are going and buying your product and using your product is not because your superior is A+ quality. It just needs to be good enough to get the job done, right? I don't need 128-bit encryption, and that's not going to be the way as a user that I'm going to judge whether I use your product or somebody else's product. It's a consumer app. I want to know it's engaging, it's fun to use, it's easy. Those are the kinds of things I care about most. So security maybe only needs to be like a C+, whereas usability needs to be an A, right? The fourth part of this is actually grade the current product. This is where the stakeholders say, okay, in order for me to hit my numbers, here's the level of quality that I actually need across these different attributes. And here's where I actually believe that the product stands today. Okay? I need it to be an A level for me to hit my numbers, but it's actually a B. So there's a gap that emerges there. It's important that they also provide supporting documentation. All right? So if I had my daughter come home with a grade that I disagreed with or that I didn't want, and she said, yeah, I don't really know why I got that grade. Obviously, I should really go talk to the teacher and say, why did my daughter get this grade? Not that I'm sort of like challenging necessarily. They're saying I disagree. I just want to understand where this is actually coming from. And even for something that's sort of like necessarily, that's sort of like subjective, you can still just sort of describe where the grade comes from. You say, okay, it's literature, it's subjective, yes, but 50% of the grade comes from class participation. And should your daughter not really participate in class very much? Like, oh, that's actually helpful. And do something about that. Similar kind of thing here. Just don't just sort of grade the product. I need to be an A and it's an F, that's all there is to it. Right? That doesn't really like help anybody. But it is helpful. You can sort of say, here's exactly why that's the case. If user experience can say, well, we run the numbers and we can understand what the click-through rates are, and there's certain kinds of funnels that users have to go through, and people are dropping off of the funnel at the stage. Here's the dashboard that basically proves that. That's a much stronger case for why we need to invest in that area of the product than to just sort of say, I think so. Right? That doesn't really do much. So supporting documentation is important, and then giving the ownership to the stakeholders. It's the stakeholders who choose what's important. It's the stakeholders who define the grades. It's worth running that by the product owner, but at the end of the day, it's not the product owner who gets to grade their own product. It's the people that they're supporting who get to grade the product. Okay, so if that's the case, then what does an example of this look like? This is a template that I tried to create for some of the companies that I've been working with, and it's basically just a one-pager report card. You can have 5 one-pager report cards spanning the whole company, and that by itself will kind of tell you, for the most part, really what you need to know. Here's the metrics that we're looking to hit, the attributes that we care about. Again, these are not features. These are descriptions of the product. It needs to be customizable. We need to win on a feature-by-feature comparison, and we need to have stickiness because otherwise our customers might abandon us. This is a good example for maybe like a SaaS company of what the sales and marketing team might say. Okay? Here's an example from an actual company that I am working with. I can't share the name of the company, but I could share with you what they had said about their own product. And you can see that they're actually missing some stuff on the supporting documentation. That's kind of the place where I said, hey, I'm going to challenge you on this. You're saying you're an A, and I'm sorry, that you're a C, but you need to be an A at this level, but you have no supporting documentation. You know what? Until you get that, I'm going to have a really hard time making this adjustment. Because guess what? At some point, the rubber's going to hit the road. There's going to be a lot of different things that we can work on. Why would I choose to work on this one when I'm not really that confident that it's the right thing that we need to work on? Okay, so that's an example. Part 3 is identify the product gaps in each scorecard. This part's really easy. You look at all the places where the grade that you need it to be is higher than the grade that it actually is. Those are the gaps in the product. That's what you need to address. And these are not just things that are sort of like wishy-washy things that they would like to have. These are tied back to the KPIs of those organizations. They can say, literally, I don't think I can meet this number unless you deliver this, unless the product improves on this front. Right? So they're kind of prioritizing the problems and tying them back to actual business metrics. So we see their grades are too low. We create a master list of the product gaps. And then there's also some consolidation that can happen as well, right? So the product manager might say, hey, there's actually 3 different organizations, each that define the exact same gap in the product. Well, I don't need to build it 3 times over. It's the same problem. Let's go solve that one time and solve 3 different stakeholders' needs simultaneously, right? So this kind of like consolidation and massaging of the gaps as well to have a little bit of interpretation. Here's a great example of that comes from OPAP. So when I was there, I had the UX team try to play a little bit more of a strategic role than they typically play, right? Usually you prioritize the features that you're going to develop. And you kind of say, okay, now that we've decided what we're going to go do, we need to make sure that they're easy to use, that they're pretty, that they're consistent in terms of design, etc. And that's a role that UX can play. But UX should also be doing the work to kind of help identify what should the priorities even be in the first place. And as a stakeholder, that's the role that they play as well. And so I said, hey, to the director at UX, play that role here and tell me what are the important things. And this is where the design principles that the UX team came up with were sort of like published externally. And if you actually look at on the web, you look at O-Power design principles. They're externally published to the world as to like what they are. And then they did a reasonable job of assessing how are we actually doing against this. And the way that they did it was less about grades and more just sort of about color coding. But they said, hey, when it comes to intuitive product design and making sure that it's universally appealing to a wide group of customers, we're doing pretty well on those fronts. We don't need to make a lot of investments there. But if we're being honest with ourselves, we have some gaps around the actionability, the engaging nature of our product, and empowering our customers to make decisions around their energy use. And so the reason that we come to that is because our reports don't tell a cohesive story. And actually every single one of these later in this PowerPoint slide presentation we had like a screen, like a page behind it of the backing up sort of like evidence behind that, right? Which is here is the actual footage that we have of a 1-minute clip of somebody trying to use our product. This is where we're getting this data from, right? And it was a very compelling, strong case for why we should be prioritizing these problems. And then I, as a product owner, ended up adjusting the roadmap and adjusting what the prioritization was going to be within the product backlog to reflect what I did here and over here. So that's where we sort of stop when it comes to understanding what the problem space is. Okay, great. We know exactly what the gaps are that we need to go solve. We can tie those gaps all the way back to the business metrics that we know that we're all accountable to try to hit. Now let's sort of move into like the solution space. Okay. So the other one is once you have these gaps, you want to propose solutions for each of these gaps. The reality is that there's a little bit of art to product management and product design. There's no sort of systematic process I can say that makes you sort of have these really good creative answers to these things. But you want to sort of be locked in on what the problem is that you're trying to solve first. If you have a really clear understanding of what that is, then you're positioned to be able to come up with what the right solutions are. So you propose various solutions to these different gaps. Be willing to experiment using Lean. What I don't think is really healthy is to say, aha, we're currently a C over here, we need to be an A. Here's this 2-year-long project that's going to go solve this problem. The reality is you're going to have a lot of assumptions behind how you do that. So be out there testing those assumptions to figure out how you can best meet sort of like close the gap between the two grades that are there. And this is the place where you really kind of transition to having the product owner. We talked about the stakeholder owning the grades. They own the problem space, right? They're sort of saying, here are the things that are really important for us for the product. That's great. Rely on them to try to help you answer that question. But as a product owner, this is where you need to kind of take hold to say, I'm the one who's going to create the solution for solving this problem. At the same time, you also need to make sure that you're running that solution by the stakeholders, because if the stakeholders disagree that your solution will actually address the gap that they've identified, you're going to have a lot of problems later when you try to finish this roadmap and say, hey, here's what we're working on. This is how it's going to go. So for example, in that going back to the car, stakeholder says, hey, I want to be able to get from point A to point B real fast. And so they envision in their head a car. Don't deliver to them a unicycle or a pogo stick, because they're going to be like, it's not reliable, right? But you might compromise a little bit of the bicycle to actually get the job done. So that's the kind of interaction that I'm talking about. A real-world example from a company over in Arlington is LiveSafe. What we were doing when we tried to come up with the right solutions on this was we identified a major gap around engagement. So what they want is broader, deeper use of an application a year after people have downloaded their mobile app. And the way that they could do that was we had to identify these kind of critical touch points. So the first thing is we wanted to make sure that we understood exactly how we're going to measure that. We're looking at total downloads, monthly active users, weekly active users, daily active users. We're looking at the actions that those users take and the triggers that they generate to try to drive engagement from other people. And those kinds of triggers should drive the following kinds of engagements, right? If I do something on the application, it should inform other people, much like Facebook. If I like something, a bunch of other people get notified. That pulls them back into Facebook. That gets them to comment on something, which then results in many more people being notified. Facebook is like the biggest spammer in the world. They like send you emails all day long, right? But they get away with it because the emails aren't coming from Facebook, they're coming from your friends, right? And that's why we kind of like tolerate that sort of number of communications and notifications that we get. And that's because what they're doing is they're improving real world interactions, right? And in this case, with FlipSafe, we sort of said, hey, this is an application around the use of mobile technology to try to make people safer. Well, one of the things that people actually do today pretty regularly is, hey, text me when you get home. That's probably the dumbest thing that we all do all the time, right? Because let's say you don't text, like you're drunk, you're going home, you forget, you fall asleep. What does that mean? Like, does it mean something terrible happened? No, not really. 99% of the time it means nothing at all. And even if it did mean something, isn't it like a little bit too late? You kind of realize that no text ever showed up. What are you going to do about it at this point? So what we're looking at there is, for example, maybe a feature where it automatically texts. It tracks your walk home, and when you get home, it automatically texts your friend to let them know that you're right. So if the text doesn't arrive, then it actually does mean something. When you kind of like get off track, that actually does mean something, right? So kind of like focusing on these real world engagements or interactions that people have is a good strategy for trying to drive engagement. So this is where you start to think outside the box about ways of driving the kinds of interactions that we have and closing the gap between the product rates as they stand today and where they need to be to hit the company goals. Number 5, prioritize the initiatives, right? So identify the top few initiatives that are out there. This is, honestly where the rubber hits the road. Obviously, you're going to have more gaps. You're going to have more ideas for the product and where it should go. Then you're going to have time to get those done, right? Otherwise, you need to let go of some engineers. So it's important to be good with kind of like figuring out which ones you should work on, which ones you can't. There's no sort of like silver bullet answer here as well, where I can just say, oh, clearly, here's the sort of step-by-step process for figuring this stuff out. I actually really don't like ROI and NPV analyses because it's just a million assumptions baked into those models. You get this nice clean number that gets spit out, but if you actually look in the Excel spreadsheets that led to that number, you're like, well, where did this stuff come from, right? So you have to have some sort of way of judging what's good and what's bad. But a lot of things that come out of that is you realize that maybe there's a department who's asking for a certain set of features, and you've agreed on what those features would be to close a particular product gap. But what you realize is there may be other ways that they can close that gap as well. So for example, the internal customer support team is running into a lot of issues. They're supposed to kind of work better with tighter budgets. There's tools enhancements that they want for internal tools to make it easier for them to do their job. If we don't have time to get to that, there is a workaround, which is you hire another person, right? We can do that. And so if we run into these kinds of issues, then maybe we'll focus the attention of product development on those things that have no workarounds. There is no other way to make it. Right? So having those conversations between the executive and the product owner is really helpful, but it's a lot easier to have those kinds of conversations when you have this sort of a model put out there in the first place. So it's worth questioning everything and being creative, but also pushing back on its constraints. Maybe the budget is a constraint that should be pushed back upon because people don't realize what the implications are for the business of having that constraint. The whole reason that we have this constraint here is to try to make the bottom line look a lot better over here. But if we actually added $30,000 budget here, then we would afford ourselves the ability to go build something else that makes $1 million in incremental sales. Well, hey guys, that's pretty well worth it. But you don't know that that's the situation until you go through something like this. And then the last part is you do have to explain the difficult choices to the stakeholders. But having gone through the rigor of a process like this, you can say, hey, look, I understand what the issue is with the product. I know what you think that the product needs to be. I know what the product currently is, and we agree on that. I've proposed a solution that you also agree with, that is the right solution to go close this gap. The reality is we don't have time to get to that solution right now. We're going to have to defer that for a couple of quarters. And what that means is I just kind of need you to hold the line for now. And when I've had conversations like that, and I can back it up with this kind of stuff, these conversations go amazingly smoothly. When things go bad is when I sit in a dark room as a product owner and try to figure out what all the priorities should be, and then I sort of unveil the roadmap, and their stuff isn't on there. And they're kind of like, well, why is that the case, right? So there's some nice transparency that gets kind of built into the process as well. An example of this, again, just kind of back to OPower. I use OPower a lot because this stuff is old. And so I can show you examples of things that are there from maybe 2 years ago, and that's okay, they don't mind. Versus if I showed you stuff from some other companies, it's a little bit more difficult because they're sensitive to the information. But here's an example where the UX team, as a follow-up to their definition of where the gaps were within the product, said, okay, here are things that we see that are on the roadmap and things that are not on the roadmap that need to be put on the roadmap, right? So if there's something that you're already working on and you're thinking about moving things around, make sure you don't move these things because they're really important to us. And for these other ones that are not on the roadmap, here are the ideas that we have. So this is product management and UX working together to kind of figure out what those new initiatives should actually be. Finally, we sort of like publish the roadmap, right? And I'm just going to make this statement. Another tweetable comment. The roadmap is the beating heart of any product-driven company, whether they're agile or not. Okay? And I've heard a lot of people within the agile community kind of push back against the notion of a roadmap, saying, well, the product backlog is your roadmap, and it doesn't need to have any dates attached to it. Well, sort of. I mean, if you're trying to make it so it's a product-driven company, what that means is you have to respect the fact that marketing and sales and customer service and everybody else has to staff based on what's going to be coming in the product, right? So you don't want to hire your head of European sales if you're not going to be internationalizing the product in time to go get that done. Nor do you sort of want to wait until the product's been internationalized, and then the reality is now you got to make your hire for your European sales VP, but it takes you months to find the right person and get them up to speed, and in the meantime you've had this product that couldn't be sold for a year, right? So there's a little bit of coordination that needs to happen, and coordination requires to some extent some sort of level of not necessarily commitment, but some sort of level of expectation setting that needs to happen, and I think a roadmap can help to pull that kind of thing together. It's not anti-agile unless you start making a ton of feature date pair commitments. Then it becomes very anti-agile real quick, right? So you have to sort of be able to budge on something, whether that's scope, whether that's timing, whether that's quality, whatever, right? But having some sort of expectation setting within the organization is really important, and a roadmap is a great way of providing that. So don't commit to dates. Organize the initiatives into swim lanes. I think it's really nice to be able to know, in order to close this gap, we are working on these things. In order to close this gap, we are working on these things, and so on. Because that's what allows every engineer ultimately to say, I love the idea that the CEO can come to an engineer and say, tell me what you're working on right now and tell me why you're working on it. And they can actually trace the whole thing. I'm working on this task because it's part of this user story, which is part of this initiative, which is going to close this gap, which is identified to the stakeholder to try to go hit this KPI. That's the golden ticket, right? If you can make that happen. And it would be great to have that kind of thing happening throughout the entire organization, both for the sake of the engineer as well as the CEO and everybody else in between. So organizing them into swim lanes can be helpful. And then post the roadmap on the wall, right? Transparency. Here's what we're working on. Here's why we're working on it. Post those scorecards on the wall, right? Every department can see what every other department's critical elements of the product would be, right? So to me, as a salesperson, what's important is that the cost can be kept low enough that we can actually be competitive in the market. What's important to the UX team is something completely different, but it's helpful for me to see what that is, so I understand what the drivers are that the product owner has to be aware of as they're making trade-off decisions, right? For everybody to kind of see what's going on, what's actively being worked on, and why is really valuable. Back to O-Power, here's an example of what the roadmap looked like. This was the new markets team that was working on a bunch of different delivery over the course of different quarters. Here's what we were basically saying we're going to get done. There's no dates necessarily attached to this, but every once in a while, because it was really critical for the sales team, and the sales cycles were so long, the company, we did actually have to make a feature date commitment. And what we would say is, what we're going to do is we're going to shuffle risk around as necessary to make this happen. So we couldn't commit to everything, but we might be able to commit to 25% of the roadmap by shuffling the risk that would have been on that 25% to other stuff. So if things start going awry and we start not getting the right answers that we're looking for, we need to kind of continue to iterate, that's fine. We will continue to iterate. It means we won't start the other project because we're going to be actively working on finishing this one. That's a way of transferring risk from one project to another. But there were certain areas where we had to do that, but we were trying to be very tight with sort of like when we did that and when we didn't. But here's the new markets team. The gap that was there was, hey, we don't have an internationalized product. Here are the things that we need to do to have that international product. Or devices in control. This is basically another fancy way of saying mobile. We have a gap on mobile, right? So great web application, great paper reports and emails, but the mobile app is something that's kind of like missing out there. That's the thing we want to go build. This is the team that's going to be doing it. Here's what they're going to be delivering. It's sort of like approximately when. Finally, so converting the roadmap into the product backlog. I'm not suggesting that you do a roadmap instead of a backlog. I'm suggesting you have both. Because one, first of all, which salesperson wants to go through Jira? You're like, oh, great, yeah, that's 500 user stories, I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. No, I mean, they need to understand things in terms of hey, what's roughly going to be kind of delivered when? Because those are the kinds of things that I can talk about with my clients. And so it's nice to have that, but at the same time, hey, look, there's a whole entire product development team who's working in an agile process, and they need to understand what the backlog looks like and know things down to the user story level, to the acceptance criteria level, etc. And so converting it into a backlog is actually not terribly difficult, right? You kind of gracefully handle dependencies. This is a matter of talking to the engineers and saying, hey, do we have like an engine and a tailpipe issue going on here? Because if so, let's go figure that stuff out, and we'll make sure that the user stories are kind of like structured that way. Or even more importantly, do we have a brakes versus acceleration problem? Let's not, for example, give the user the ability to create something that they can't delete or edit. I see that kind of thing happening all the time, right? Like, oh yeah, it's valuable to be able to create an entity in a database, and then you can't do anything about it once it's there. And we'll get that out next spring. No. Minimum viable product is all CRUD operations simultaneously. Then you can go ahead and put it out there, right? So those are the kinds of things that engineering can help with, that UX can help with, the kinds of things sometimes the business side can help with as well. Proactively address the risks. This could be risks on sort of like thinking about risk from a lean perspective, like what are the sort of business assumptions and user assumptions that are baked into this that we should go test up front. Or it could be assumptions about, about technology, right? That we can use a certain kind of technology, that a certain kind of API integration will be easy to do. We'll go test that stuff out first. It doesn't mean that because you have a roadmap that you have to have all the answers defined as to exactly what the end-to-end step-wise procedure is to get to the finished product. You might start with something and kind of learn as you go and sort of iterate within a particular initiative. That's something I very highly endorse. Balance the desires with urgency, okay? So don't ask for a car when all you have time for is a bicycle, but don't build a unicycle either, because fall flat interest, right? Commingle your maintenance tasks. So far, what we've talked about is what I'll call metrics movers. And there's one guy that I just want to call out real quick. There's a guy whose blog I really like, Adam Nash. If you've ever read any of his stuff, is quite good. He was actually a co-worker with me when I was at eBay. But he's got like some really good stuff on a blog. And one of the things that he talks about is the sort of 3 buckets of things that show up in a product roadmap, and sort of like a healthy product roadmap. One of them is metrics movers. And that's really what we talked about here, right? So here's the metrics of the business, here's how we're going to move those metrics forward, here's how product development plays a role in that, and here's how we tie the whole thing together all the way through to prioritization and the generation of the product backlog. But there are 2 other buckets as well. One of them is sort of like the things you kind of just need to do to keep going as a business, which is you can't keep telling your customers no forever on things. Sometimes you're in a business where customers have specific kinds of needs, they have specific kinds of things that they're looking for, and they tell you time and time again to deliver them. Throw them a bone every once in a while, it's worth doing. You also have bugs that are outstanding. You need to go clean up those bugs, right? You have technical debt that needs to be worked down. You go get that stuff done as well. So there's this kind of other category of things that don't fall really neatly into this process that I'm defining. It's not to say that you don't do them. It's that what I talked about is about 70% of your code. Maybe the next 20% is really about these kind of like maintenance-related items that are there. And the last 10% is this third bucket of delighters. Those things that your customers never asked for, but once you deliver them, they're like, oh wow, that's great, that's really neat. Probably one of the best examples of that I remember that actually had a really significant impact on the business was when Apple released the first iPhone. Because I was just not, I was like, I'm fine with the phone that I got, no problem. Why would I want to buy this stupid iPhone thing for several $100s when I can get my free phone right now? And I remember the commercial. You remember this, right? The very first time you saw this, where somebody's tapping around and doing stuff, and they surf the web, and then there's this magical moment where the guy turns it sideways, and it animates in this kind of goofy way, and the text grows to be bigger, and then the guy scrolls down on the page. I'm like, that's cool, right? Like that's really neat. That was kind of the moment where I was like, wow, maybe I really should get a phone like this. It's not a thing that I would have ever sort of asked for. I'm sure in a bunch of user interviews they did leading up to the design of the product that they never really found. People say, hey, what's really important to me and what's going to be a critical judgment call for me as I make a purchase decision about my phone is that when I tilt it sideways, I can actually have the screen, like nobody's going to say that, right? So if they focus only on the things that customers ask for, or if they focus on those things that are sort of like metrics movers for the business, they wouldn't come up with that. Apple's really good about coming up with those delighters, and that's one of the reasons that they can create commercials like that. It's the reason that I bought the iPhone. It's the reason we all still talk about Apple's products today, right? So putting those things into the roadmap is important as well. There are completely different processes for handling customer requests, completely different processes you want to talk about for handling delighters, but having some sort of a combination of those things is something that's healthy as well. I would say predict potentially shippable bundles and predict sprint backlogs 3 sprints ahead, to me, are healthy things to do. Notice the word predict, don't commit. But just knowing, like if you're a UX designer, it's kind of nice to know if I want to have the requirements done just in time, but there's this kind of long period of design work that I need to do. What are we sort of expecting to have engineering go work on like 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now? It would be kind of nice for me to be like aware of that so I can kind of prioritize my work ahead of time accordingly. Or if I'm in marketing, right? You know, you can't just sort of say, hey, you know, in 2 weeks' time we're going to have, you know, this feature roll out. You can say, hey, it takes me more than 2 weeks to get all the like press release stuff like all organized. Can you give me a sense as to like at least what you're expecting, so they can start to do their work? Now, if you pull back and decide not to release that thing because it's not, you know, potentially a releasable product or you didn't get it done during the sprint, that's okay. You tell them as well, hey, let's pull back on the marketing plan as well. But at least give them like a heads up as to what the expectations are going to be. That again helps for product to stay in the middle of the company, right? So that it's a product-driven company rather than a marketing-driven company. Otherwise, it can be marketing-driven, and then you start getting a lot of dates kind of like pushed to you. But if you're going to sort of take on the burden of being a product-driven company, it requires at least some sort of coordination with the other teams. No feature date commitments, but at the same time, some sort of expectation setting. So that's basically the process in a nutshell. What it should yield is something like this. So instead of you put the roadmap out there and everybody's like, people say, yeah, of course. Like, why did you even bother producing this thing? I thought we already talked about this. That's a good thing, right? When people say that. You can improve the parts of the product that matter. And the CEO says, well, how do I just get this sooner, right? So it's not that everybody's like super, lovey-dovey and happy and hugging each other and stuff like that. It's that the kinds of questions and the kind of concerns that get raised start to shift from, how come we haven't built anything lately, to how do I get this stuff sooner? Or, I don't really agree with what I'm seeing in the roadmap, to, yeah, we already talked about this. Like, what's the big deal here, right? That's actually a really good thing. You add the features that you know are going to move the needle, right? And sales says, hey, I'm dying to have this. Be sure to let me know when it's released, right? These are all good signs. Do what your customers actually need, rather than what they say that they need, which is two very different things. And they stick with you despite their pet peeve issues sometimes, and walk stakeholders through the plan periodically, and make sure that the stakeholders are aligned. So having these interim deliverables before you get to the stage of the roadmap can really help with that. Questions sometimes that executives ask about this. They say, okay, it's great, you can delegate this whole thing to the team. Now, whether you take this process that I just sort of like described or not, when you're trying to roll out Agile or become a more Agile organization, a lot of times the pushback comes from the executive level. It's like there's a lot of stuff embedded in it, which is like empowerment of the team. That's a good thing. But if you're the executive, you're kind of like, well, what do I do? Right? And I feel like I've got good judgment calls on things. How do I get involved in this process? If I'm completely empowering the team, when am I supposed to get involved? And the idea here is that I think the way that they get involved is if you can be clear with them about ways they get involved in ensuring that the right product's backlog is set, then they feel okay not being so involved in sort of like the execution of that backlog once they've sort of like approved what it is. And that's what I've kind of found time and time again. So one of the best ways of getting executive buy into Agile is to give them ways that they can have checkpoints in the places where it matters to them. And what I like about this is it does establish certain kinds of checkpoints where they can kind of like call people out on their BS. Right? So number one is everyone who needs a voice actually has it. So the CEOs are saying, okay, let's stop. You identify who the stakeholders are. Don't go further yet. Let's see who are the stakeholders. Let's make sure that the user is actually accounted for. Let's make sure that this one group that I think is really important for the future of the organization, like let's say it's business development. How come nobody talked to business development? Let's make sure that they actually have a voice in this as well. Go back to the drawing board, throw them back in before you kind of like get too far. That's a good checkpoint for the CEO to have. Attribute grades are defensible, right? This is where they say, hey, sales, you're saying that the product needs to be an A on this and that it's currently a D. I don't buy it for a second, right? It does not need to be an A on this. I have yet to see a sale that we didn't win because this thing was missing. You cannot tell me that's actually important. I think we need to be a C at this level, and I think we already are a C at this level, right? It's a good place to kind of like call somebody out for their BS. Number three, initiatives are bold and yet practical. So they can look at the actual solutions that product managers are proposing to this and say, hey, look, we have, we want to be bold in our moves as an organization. I think this is I just don't think this is going to move the needle. It's too small scale. Or they might say the opposite, which is, we're going to make this really huge investment in this direction. I'm not really sure about this. What can we do to kind of like test this is the right thing, first of all, and kind of like make sure that there's actually, that there is a lean approach that's going into this. It's also nice to be aware of the constraints. The CEO may have put a bunch of different kinds of constraints. The CFO has put a bunch of different kinds of constraints on organizations with budgets, with timelines, and things like that. And you can sort of say, hey, look, here's how those constraints are affecting the decisions that we have to make about how we're going to go deliver against these gaps that are appearing. And if we were to push back on this constraint, then we could actually do a lot more, right? And so it's worth actually hashing that out. Maybe the constraint doesn't get lifted, but at least everybody's aware of the implication of that constraint. Maybe the constraint does get lifted and the business is off to the races. And then finally, the roadmap timeline is realistic. So at the end of the day, you sort of say, hey, here's the roadmap. Here's where we're kind of like looking, you know, at delivering things. It's again expectation setting. It's not sort of like, hey, here's the commitments. But if somebody says, hey, you know, this doesn't really, it might be unrealistic in either direction. It might be way too long that you think you're going to get to something, and it's worth hashing that out. Or it may be that the team says, hey, yeah, we're going to deliver a bunch of stuff really soon, and somebody can say, hey, hold on, I'm not really sure if that's actually right. I don't believe it. So let's plan on these things actually happening a little bit later. And that's actually a really good kind of healthy sign as well. All right, so the takeaways, coming back to this, what I want you to walk away with is the method for identifying the stakeholders. We talked about that. Having a metrics-driven prioritization process. So we talked about how the engineer can have the CEO come to them and say, why are you working on what you're working on? And they can tie it all the way back to stakeholder KPIs. Tools to provide transparency. There's the roadmap itself, which is like a much better vehicle for explaining what the plan is for a product-driven company to folks like stakeholder groups that are out there. And then there's also these interim deliverables, where it's kind of like the scorecards themselves, which get posted on the wall, which everybody can kind of like see. They get the rationale for why we're working on the things that we're working on. We talked about strategy for focused innovation. So the key here is that you don't prioritize 20% of this initiative and 20% of that initiative and 15% of that one. You say, we're going to go close this gap. This is the one we're going to be focused on. Let's go do it, and let's go do it all. Right? Now, all the way still may mean taking a lean approach, but don't sort of like pick out little individual user stories across the board. Otherwise, you get back to that situation where the CEO says, hey, you've been working on the product for the last 18 months, but we haven't really done anything. That's what happens when you sort of like nitpick on little individual things that seem like they're a good idea individually, but collectively, they're not the right stuff. I wanted to provide you real-world examples. Hopefully we've done that. And I also wanted to answer your questions. I don't know what time we have right now. So we have 5 minutes. So we can do 5 minutes of Q&A real quick. And if you don't have a chance to answer your question now, I will be happy to talk to you during one of the breaks. Just the last thing real quick. Just again, my contact information in case, again, you just want to reach out to me this way. I would encourage you, just one thing is on this website. What I did is I published a toolkit at the Foster Innovation site, which is exactly this process that I just talked about, right? So it has that template for the scorecard. It has a 8-page Word document description of the whole process, kind of end to end, and all the kind of nuances for rolling it out, a couple notes, side notes, things like that. And then it also has even a presentation that you could deliver internally within your own organization to try to roll something else like this out. And it's not in PDF format, it's all in PowerPoint, so feel free to edit it and do whatever is appropriate if it's something you think there are elements that you want to like sort of take and put in your organization. I also do some advising and consultation. We talked about that. I'm not here to sell my services, but if it's just something you want to follow up on, please let me know. Questions? Yeah.
So I have a question on the scorecard.
Yeah.
So you have multiple stakeholder groups. The scorecard is different. They have identify different goals, KPIs.
Yeah.
Come in differently. They might have the same ones. They might not.
Yeah, that's right. So the question was, would different stakeholder groups have different scorecards? And the answer is yes. So what I would do is I would still cluster them. So I'd say sales and marketing, you're working together kind of as one. That means I want one scorecard that represents both sales and marketing together, but that would still be different from the scorecard that maybe comes from product management plus executive team, right? And that might be different from what comes from the customer support and technical operations team. Within that, they should be spelling out the KPIs that those individual organizations have collectively, and then what the attributes are of the product that are important for them as they sort of look to hit those metrics. And that's going to be a different set of answers for one group versus another.
And then it's merging those together in some way.
Yeah, you know, so with regard to merging them, I don't like the idea necessarily of merging the scorecards because I think it's actually really helpful for each organization to see what the other organizations say are important about the product. And I like just kind of collecting them all and saying, you know, hey, we're going to post it on the wall. Here's 5 different scorecards from 5 different groups of stakeholders. Here's what they said were important about the product. Here are the grades that they kind of like put on the product, and here's where the product actually is. Every once in a while, you will have the same attribute appear twice or even 3 times on sort of like different scorecards. And I think it's still fine to see that. It just highlights the criticality of getting that part right? So I think it's worth doing that. I think where the merging happens is when you're looking at the gaps that are there in the product. You know, might be the case that ease of use is really important both for sales during a demo, but also for UX in terms of users using the product down the road. You might say, hey, that's the same gap, kind of like written twice. We're going to go try to solve that problem once, and I'm going to review my solution as a product owner back with both stakeholder groups to make sure that they're both comfortable with what the solution is. One more question? Yeah.
So does it sound like there's maybe a sort of a 2-level prioritization, or at least 2-level, like you have a series or a set of KPIs of things metrics that are potentially important. So the first level of prioritization, you might want to say, okay, in the next release or whatever, we're going to focus on moving this particular metric. And then once you've focused or once you've identified a particular goal, you decide on which things are most likely to move this particular metric out of the potential option space for that.
I think that's roughly what I'm suggesting is a little bit of a nuance difference, which I don't think that product owners are going to be put in a position where they get a chance to prioritize some other stakeholder group's KPI, right? So if that group, like let's say marketing, has a KPI, they need to meet some number of shares of content out there, and you realize that there's a product opportunity that will allow for that. They may say, hey, there's a gap in the product that's preventing you from doing this. What you're prioritizing is the gaps, and what you're prioritizing is the initiatives that you're going to go after within the next iteration. But to say that the KPI is itself important, yes or no, is something that usually the product owner would have the ability to do. That's usually a conversation between the head of marketing and CEO, not so much where the product owner actually gets involved. All right. Well, thanks a lot for listening.